Welcome everyone. So you want to hear about luminescence dating? Be sure to watch my sister presentation from Gloria. At any time during this presentation, you may not ask for questions. Rather, you may pause or rewind. Luminescence is a dating technique, one among several. And I'm sorry if your favorite technique is not shown here. It is a dosimetric dating technique. By dosimeter, we mean that a mineral such as quartz can absorb a radiation that is present in the environment. How can a mineral be a dosimeter? It is with imperfection in the mineral lattice. The most common way is when an atom is missing, or if it was substituted for another. How about torsion, you may ask? Well, sadly for you, you cannot see me on the dance floor this afternoon. A fun fact, if you take quartz, pure quartz, with no defect in it, in the environment, we find these with a hydrothermal quartz vein. They will display zero luminescence signal. There are three different ways to measure the radiation dose absorbed in minerals. In each situation, the area under the curve, or the amplitude here, is proportional to the amount of dose absorbed by the mineral. And so there are three different techniques that was developed. There's a thermoluminescence, optically stimulated luminescence, and electron spin resonance. Each of them measure the same thing, but in different ways, and the way is how it is stimulated that we achieve the process. And by far, for dating, we use OSL. The age calculation is very simple. We measure the total amount of energy absorbed in the mineral, and it is divided by the amount of radioactivity that is present in the sediment. Gloria has greater detail on the dose rate. I will only focus on the absorbed dose. There is a finite amount of energy that the dosimeter will absorb. If there is too much energy being accumulated, the mineral will reach a state of saturation. Quartz, if we compare quartz versus feldspar, feldspar has an ability to absorb a far greater amount of radiation, which implies that we can measure older ages with feldspar. That's just for the dose rate, but I will refer you back to Gloria for greater detail. Here I show luminescence ages versus independent ages, either on a log-to-log scale or a linear scale in inset. So what we can see is when it is applied properly, OSL dating will provide reliable ages from a few years of age up to about 300 Ka. But here in this presentation, I want to show you that luminescence dating fulfills the requirement to be a reliable dating tool. Essentially, that we know the initial condition, we know how the signal evolves with time, and finally, we know that the signal is stable. So for the initial condition, for luminescence, what we expect is that at time 0, the signal is 0. One way to measure that is to measure sediment, measure the age of sediment, where I show here, again on a long scale or a linear scale in inset, are luminescence ages versus independent ages, but for very young sediment, so from a few years of age up to about 1,000 years at the top here. And what we can see here is that it looks quite good. We do not see any obvious offset in the data, and so we feel confident that at time 0 the signal is 0. But how confident we are, well, it depends on where we are in the environment. And so all the labels shown on that graph here are places where we can apply luminescence dating, and but some environments are better than others. They are easier than others, I want to say, when it comes to that initial condition. And so again, so if we test that hypothesis by taking a modern sediment, so by that I mean a sediment that are currently in transport, either in a river or by wind or coastal processes like a beach, and we measure the luminescence ages. We can see here that for wind and wave, the luminescence age is 0 or very close to. But for fluvial, it's a little bit more difficult, and so we see that there's a tail to older ages that may manifest itself, and it's something that we call a partial bleaching. Subject for another time. Next, does the signal grow in a predictable manner? Well, here what I show here is the natural luminescence signal on Y against the independent value. So it is the expected absorbed dose for a sediment. So for that we need to have what we say is a known age, a sediment. And so what we can see here on the graph is that, well, the natural signal grows. It becomes higher for a higher amount of doses absorbed in a predictable manner, but then we reach a point where the signal will eventually reach a saturation where the natural signal can no longer increase with absorbed dose. And so if we think about applying luminescence dating in that case, well, the part delimited by the green data point, this is where it is the easiest to apply luminescence dating. For the red part, well, it's very hard to get precise ages. And then is the signal stable with time? Well, so if you recall, in the beginning of my presentation, I was showing that for quartz and feldspar, the amount of luminescence signal that we can measure as a function of absorbed dose is different between the two minerals. With feldspar, I've shown briefly that feldspar can measure, can absorb much more greater amount of dose before reaching a saturation level compared to quartz, which will saturate much more early for younger, smaller radiation dose. So there is a potential with feldspar to measure greater H's. But the question that I want to ask here is the signal stable? Well, for feldspar, it is not stable, and sadly, and it is something that we have known for a very long time. And here's some nice review from 1985, and on less. So less is a very good material for luminescence because it is well reset. But what we show here is the luminescence age versus the independent age, and we can see that there is a significant age underestimation from feldspar, and that at that time Debenham was arguing that that there seemed to be an age limit of about 100 Ka with feldspar, and so bring back to the statement. The third statement is the signal stable? Well, with quartz, yes, the signal is stable, but with feldspar, the answer is no. The signal will be leaking. There's a leak in the box. We can see that there's a small hole here around the box. So the electrons can leak out of the box. It's an issue that we call anomalous fading. What's the implication? Well, the implication is significant. For fading in feldspar, the age underestimation will be between 30 to 50% on average. But fortunately, for the past 20 years, we have correction methods that are now available. And for the last 10 years, there's even circumvention methods that are available to get around that problem of fading. And but all of that is a subject for another time. What I show here is the luminescence age derived from feldspar against independent ages. And if we simply measure the luminescence age from feldspar, we can see that it underestimates, and quite significantly. In a laboratory condition, we can measure this phenomenon. What it consists is we give a dose of radiation, and then we measure the luminescence signal. We repeat the radiation dose, but then we wait a certain amount of time before measuring the luminescence response. If the signal will be stable, we would observe the same amount of luminescence signal no matter the time elapsed since we gave a radiation dose. Unfortunately, with feldspar, the signal will decrease with time. So what we see here is the luminescence signal that is measured against the time that has elapsed since we gave that radiation dose in the lab. And so the signal will decrease with time in a predictable manner. Do pay attention that this is a log scale and it's linear on the Y. And so one way to tackle that problem of anomalous fading with feldspar is to apply a correction method. So as I was showing, is that if we simply measure a luminescence age from FASPAR, the age will underestimate the independent age. But by correcting for fading, we observe a perfect agreement with the independent age. Of course, it would be simpler, if not more elegant, if we could get around the problem of fading. In the past 10 years, we have such promise. What I show here are luminescence ages against an independent on a log-to-log scale, or if you prefer, a linear-to-linear scale. Now, the open circles are those ages that derive in a conventional way, like I was showing in the previous slides. The luminescence ages from FASPAR greatly underestimate the independent age. The filled circles are those that derive with the new technique, the PRIIR. And as we can see, the agreement is perfect with independent ages. And so in summary, for OSL dating, it is a burial technique. It measures the last exposure to sunlight. We apply that on quartz and feldspar minerals, and luckily for us, they are everywhere. Quartz is excellent, up to about 100 Ka, but we can measure older ages as long as the dose rate is very low in the environment. And for feldspar, well, we can measure older ages, but do be certain to take care of the problem of anomalous fading. And finally, you may pause to look for references. Thank you.